Dude, you get the best barrels ever, dude. Just like you pull in and you just get spit right out of them. And you just drop in and just smack the lip. Whoop-ah! Drop down, snap, ah! And then after that, you just drop in, just ride the barrel and get pitted. So pitted like that.
Cowabunga, dude. This is easily the best build in D4 right now, capable of clearing pit 150s, along with speed farming 101 tapping uber bosses after only a day of playing. Problem is, it's clunky, requires a lot of gear, and it's hard to play. Right? Right? Hell no, my friends, because I've gone out of my way to create a version of the build that requires no gear at all. It's smooth as hell, and on top of that, it's incredibly fun. So say goodbye to manually picking up blood orbs, crying yourself to sleep, and swiping for gear. Play this instead, and you'll enjoy life again. The build is viable right off the bat when you hit 60, only requiring you to find one tempering manual and a shitty pair of Keseme's pantaloonies, and you'll have the build online. Let's talk about the basics of the build and how I've made it actually work and be fun. For starters, it's of course a Bloodwave build. This skill is what deals all the damage in this build. It's also an ultimate, meaning the cooldown of this fucking thing takes ages to recharge. So how do we solve this? Well, that's rather easy, actually. By slapping on ultimate cooldown reduction everywhere, you can reduce its cooldown. The remaining cooldown after each blood wave is then sorted via the fast blood aspect, which simply reduces the cooldown of our blood wave when we pick up blood orbs. And where the hell does these blood orbs come from then? Also easy, actually. They come from our blood waves. Each blood wave we spawn dishes out 6 orbs, and we spawn a shit ton of blood waves. We then just grab the blood orbs, reduce the cooldown back to 0, and repeat. Thing is, though, picking up blood orbs is annoying as shit, especially if you're speed farming, doing purple hell tides or whatever. Is there any way to solve this? Oh, you beautiful man, there is. By grabbing the Quillgore aspect and utilizing Blood Lance, we can instead use the lances to pick up the orbs for us. By throwing out 2 Blood Lances while we're waiting for our blood waves to do their thing, we will in turn have enough time to collect all the blood orbs we need to reduce the cooldown back down to 0. Not only that, though, because you also need to collect enough blood orbs for your Rathma's Vigor to trigger, because without this thing, you won't overpower. And when you don't overpower, you don't deal any damage. What's beautiful about Gorequill and Blood Lances, however, are that 2 Blood Lances are the perfect amount to both reset the cooldown of your blood wave and collect enough orbs for this key passive. This makes the gameplay smooth as hell. You throw out a blood wave, which takes a bit of time to do their thing due to the tidal aspect, time that we spend throwing out 2 blood lances, reset everything, blood wave, and repeat. Smooth, huh? Damn right. This makes the build able to actually speed farm, as having to run around picking up blood orbs is not only annoying and boring as fuck, but also slow as fuck. Alright, and what about the rest of the skills then? What the hell are they used for? Well, from left to right, we have Corpse Explosion. We use this whenever we fight rough elites or pit push, as we don't need to use our blood lances when we stand on top of enemies, and in turn, stand right on top of all the blood orbs. Using Corpse Explosion, then in turn, allows us to spend corpses, which grants us additional damage. And speaking about additional damage, it's also the reason we use Blight. We're only using this thing when pit pushing or dealing with bosses, as we're otherwise just speeding forward and one-shotting everything. The Corpse Tendril is there to pull in all the enemies as to nuke them down, and again, only used when fights take too long. And finally, Blood Mist, which is our get-out-of-jail-free card, in case an enemy decides to peg us into submission. Lovely, huh? Yeah. So that's the skills and basics. To fully appreciate this magnificent build, though, we need to go through the gear and aspects. So let's do that. But first, make sure to slap on your swashbuckler's trusty tricorn because you can't ride these waves without a proper pirate's cap. Alright, starting us right off with the gear, adding Bloodlance into the mix has an additional benefit. You can use Crown of Lucien. By spending a bunch of resources, we in turn deal additional damage. This is incredible until you get to the Ultra Endgame version where you will be fully decked out in Ubers. And speaking of Ultra Endgame version, I'm providing you with a pit-pushing variant for more damage in the planner where you're not rocking Bloodlance, simply due to you standing in the face of your opponents while pit-pushing, and may as well pick up the Blood Orbs by yourself, and also the Uber-Duber version for massive schlong DPS and speed. But for this guide, we'll focus on the early game setup and speed setup. Alright, and to gain back our resources when we play with Bloodlance, we use the Aura of Lament. This also benefits us as we need to use an aura anyways to utilize aura specialization. An Aura of Lament is great for this, seeing as it is not only capable of being out for the full duration, but also 2 of them, ensuring that we always got the thing up. When it comes to masterworking, focus on the cooldown reduction here, of course. The lower cooldown on your blood wave, the better. I'm currently on 12 seconds, which allows me to use the fast blood aspect on one of my rings rather than on the amulet, which is also a tip for when you're just starting off. If you imprint the fast blood aspect onto your amulet, then resetting your blood wave will be way easier. Your blood waves spawns orbs like crazy, and Bloodlance slurps them up like candy. But just as you're starting off, you don't really have any cooldown reduction, and this should then solve it. Oh, and if you don't have Lucian yet, just grab a regular helmet with cooldown reduction on it. Next up is the chest. Here I'm doing 2 things that you should only do as you're starting off. First thing is imprinting the Juggernaut's aspect. You don't want this, it's shit, but it works when you're lacking armor. I need to do this because I'm in need of a resistance roll. When you've got more intelligence, however, then you'll have enough resistances to skip this roll and can instead go for armor on your gear and throw the Juggernaut aspect in the fucking trash along with my hopes and dreams. Other than that, though, make sure to get a bunch of int and max life everywhere, as you'll mainly be playing close up and don't want to fucking die. Max life also has an additional benefit. Due to us always overpowering, you're gaining more overpower damage the more max life you have. It doesn't show up in the tooltip, but I shit you not, it's in the calculations for overpower damage. For the runes, I'm then rocking the Exol and Gar runes here for additional crit chance. You can also go with the Max Life rune, which I recommend if you have any issues whatsoever with survivability. The Exol rune is in turn triggered when we spawn Dark Shrouds via the Zanmot rune combination. And don't underestimate this combination. Each Dark Shroud grants 8% damage reduction for a total of 40% when you've stacked it up by spamming ultimates. Alright, and then we have the gloves. This is where I'm slapping on the Gore Quill's aspect to pick up the blood orbs as I'm lazy as hell. For pit pushing, you would then instead grab the Apogeic Fura aspect to deal additional damage and swap Bloodlance for Decompose. You won't actually use Decompose then, but you will have it on your bars due to the Reaper's Pursuit increasing your damage per darkness skill on your bars. For the stats, Crit Chance is your best friend, as we have a bunch of crit damage multipliers along with damage while fortified. And why damage while fortified? Well, shit. That's the reason this build is so massively overtuned. Let's check it out. We increase our blood wave damage by 30% of our damage while fortified and damage while healthy. This in turn becomes our main goal in life, to stack as much of these 2 stats as possible. Once my glyphs are all leveled up and my gear is masterworked, you should see 1000% multiplier here. Pretty great. And while on the topic of blood wave, we also have Supreme Blood Wave, which is how we spawn our blood orbs. Here it says 6 blood orbs, but we are combining it with the tidal aspect to spawn additional blood waves, so the amount of blood orbs and in turn our cooldown reduction is actually way higher. And finally, spiked armor. Get this as your utility tempers until you're capped on armor, as it increases your armor via the skill tree. Other great utility tempers are corpse tendril size and curse size. I'll be rocking those once I've got a bit better gear. All right, and then to the only item you actually need for the build to function. Or, well, honestly, you don't actually need it, but it helps out a ton. Kessim's Legacy. This fucking thing fortifies you, grants you DR, a huge damage multiplier, and perhaps most importantly, a huge cooldown reduction bonus. It's so massive, in fact, that once you have a GA cooldown reduction, you won't really need any other cooldown reduction if you masterwork it. A lovely pair of pantaloonies, I must say. For the sneakers, there's not much to say. Essence per second is important if you want to rock Crown of Lucian, or else you'll run out of essence. If you don't use the helmet, though, then you can skip it. One important thing here, though, you definitely don't want the implicit that I'm using. Getting additional evade charges or attacks reduce evade cooldown would help me out a lot when pit pushing, as it would allow me to evade through enemies more frequently. But for now, this is what I have. Now, we also definitely want Decrepify, but we don't want to have it on our bars, so that's why we are rocking the Cursed Aura aspect. It's this thing spinning around us on the ground, allowing for damage reduction, cooldown reduction, and crowd control. Absolutely lovely. All right, and then to the weapons. Using a two-hander is a slight DPS increase, but using a focus allows for more cooldown reduction, helping you out with gearing, as well as allowing us to use an additional aspect to bring in the Gore Quill aspect. The reason a two-hander would provide some additional damage is due to the tidal aspect being fucking disgusting. 240% damage increase? How about hell yes. You then go with the usual stats, damage while fortified, and chance for Blood Wave to deal double damage. Make sure to get this to 100% and you'll be Gucci. Funnily enough, the damage increase you would get from using a two-hander is actually not a big of a difference as you would think with good gear. Because if you were to masterwork chance to deal double damage, then you could use and masterwork Titan's Fall, for example, on your second weapon. But you do you, my friend. For the second weapon, you need to imprint the ultimate shadow aspect. This allows you to turn your blood wave into shadow, and in turn, benefit from all the shadow bonuses in your skill tree. It also allows your blood wave to spawn desecrated grounds, which we can utilize by grabbing a massive damage bonus from the desecration glyph in the Perragons when we're pit pushing. It does, however, force you to stand within the desecrated ground. And I'm not going to stand still for shit when farming LOL. And finally, we have the jewelry. For your amulet, by far the best stats to get are intelligence and coalesced blood. And hey, will you look at that, I've got both. The reason we want coalesced blood is due to the double dipping it does. First, we simply get additional damage, and secondly, it goes directly into your blood wave damage bonus as it increases your damage while healthy. I'm also going with movement speed here, as I enjoy being fast as fuck. On our jewelry is then where we can start slapping on a bunch of cooldown reduction for our blood wave. If you already have the new gems, then you'll find the ones you want in the planner. But man, that shit takes long to farm. For the aspects, we then go for Sacrificial Aspect for a huge, consistent damage bonus, along with Fast Blood to reduce our blood wave cooldown, and finally Vehement Brawler's Aspect, which both increases our ultimate damage and reduces its cooldown. I'm also mentioning that for speed farming, it would be ideal to grab a lucky hit, chance to make enemies vulnerable on the rings, as you're otherwise relying on Corpse Tendril for vulnerable, which is slow as shit. Well, shit, friends, nicely done. Gear and aspects are now complete, and it's already skill tree a fucking clock. Let's do it. Starting us right off, the basic skills are receiving a wet fart unless you're pit pushing. We then grab Bloodlance to pick up the orbs, along with Hewed Flesh to spawn corpses, and Blight for the damage bonus. We then head off to grab Bloodmist for our Get Out of Jail Free card. Here's a massive heads up though, and this is important. Both Bloodlance and Bloodmist are blood skills. And if you remember, Rathma's Vigor makes it so our blood skills overpower. So what do you think happens if you Bloodmist or Lance when it's fully stacked? Correct, you waste that shit. So try not to do that, alright? Good. We then pick up Corpse Explosion and turn it into a Darkness skill as to increase our damage via Reaper's Pursuit as we talked about earlier, and we follow that up by grabbing a bunch of passives here for both damage and damage reduction. We then head off to grab Decrepify in the Curse skills for the damage reduction and cooldown reduction in combination with a few damage passives. In the Corpse and Macabre skills, we find a bunch of lovely skills and passives. Corpse Tendril pulls enemies in for you and can also be utilized to gain Vulnerable. We also have some huge damage bonuses for Darkness skills here in combination with increases to our blood damage. In the ultimate skills, we then find our lovely Blood Wave. Max it out, obviously, in combination with the lovely damage and damage reduction passives we can find here. And finally, our key passive. Rathma's Vigor is just disgusting, not only allowing us to overpower, but also increases our overpower damage by 120%. This thing is so disgusting, in fact, that we're barely dealing any damage when we're not overpowering. A must-have for sure. I'm also mentioning that Max Life grants you one additional bonus once you've got good enough gear. It decreases the amount of blood orbs you need to slurp up for Rathma's Vigor. Each blood orb you eat heals you for 15% of your life, and Rathma's Vigor reduces its cooldown by 2 seconds per 400 life, meaning the more max life you stack, the less blood orbs you'll have to eat. Cool, huh? Okay, so great job, friends. Skill tree complete. Let's check out some of the powers, sacrificed buddies, and the mercenaries now. For the powers, these are chosen for when you do not have your legendary gems yet. This is because of this power, Purging Touch. Once you have your legendary gems, you can turn your ultimate into an eldritch power and utilize this. But that requires a lot of time and effort, so I'm providing you with another witch power setup here that is easier to obtain. For the unique power, you want something that damages enemies. For this reason, I'm using the Doom Orb. I like this thing a lot, as it instantly damages all enemies, which in turn allows us to instantly hex them and utilize the hex of Shattering Witch Power for damage reduction. We already have the pull from Corpse Tendril, which I found more reliable than Piranhado playing the PTR. You can indeed use Piranhado, but then you'd have to swap Hex of Shattering to Hex of Whispers, for example. In any way, from left to right, we have Aura of Lament for resource generation and triggering a bunch of auras, which we can utilize for the aura specialization, granting us crit damage. We then have Hex of Shattering as mentioned for the damage reduction, along with Force of Will to stack up our overpower damage, and finally Soul Harvest for the intelligence. And when it comes to upgrading your powers, focus on getting Aura Specialization to 11 for the crit bonus and Aura of Lament for higher uptime for sure. For the Book of the Dead, you're sacrificing everyone because fuck 'em. The Reapers provide you with some much-needed shadow damage. You then want the Boner Mages for the overpower, and finally, your Iron Golem for a huge crit damage bonus. For your Mercenary, Subo is the man and provides us with the Seeker, which grants us Wall Hack. This is massive when doing the Purple Helltides, and a must-have for sure. We then take a few useless skills just so that we can grab Opening Fire, further increasing our crit damage. For your reinforcement, Raher is your man, as he can provide you with some much-needed defensives via Bastion. Well damn, this is turning out to be a pretty long video, huh? Hopefully you're still here, because it's indeed time for the Perragons. Fortunate for you, we only have 200 or so Perragon points to go through. Actually, the reason I've waited this long to make this video is because if you manage to get around 200 Perragon points, then you have all the important nodes that you want. The rest are just slight bonuses. I've also been so kind as to map out the Perragons in terms of how important each board is. It may not be the optimal pathing for when you're insanely high Perragons, but it's perfect for progression. So starting us right off, we have the Imbiber glyph. This provides us with both damage while healthy additive damage and multiplicative, which goes directly into your blood wave damage bonuses. Definitely something you want to work to max out early. We then go for Bloodbath, which is by far the most important legendary node we can get, for a whopping 100% plus a 25% damage bonus. We also have a bunch of damage while fortified in this board, which we want, along with max life and damage reduction. For Glyph, I'm socketing Amplify as it both provides us with damage and it boosts the nearby damage while fortified nodes. Next up is the Blood Begets Blood board, where we find a bunch of disgustingly strong damage while healthy nodes and Blood Orb healing. And why do we want Blood Orb healing? Well shit, our key passive relies exactly on Blood Orb healing to trigger, and this helps us for sure. I'm also grabbing this board early so you won't have to get too much willpower for the rare nodes here, as 360 will be just enough to get all of them along with being able to boost your damage while healthy rare node via the Gravekeeper glyph. This is also probably the best glyph we have due to the huge damage to healthy multiplicative bonus. Next you can go either up or to the left, it doesn't really matter. Here I'm going for Frailty for the damage bonus to cursed enemies and Socketing Essence for the crit. Feel free to swap this one for Desecration if you want to focus on pit pushing though. And finally, the Flesh Eater board. While spending corpses via Corpse Explosion, we gain a 40% damage increase. We'll mainly spend corpses when pit pushing, as we're otherwise just zooming through everything. But it's nice to have as we're standing still. I'm also grabbing Exhumation here for the multiplicative damage, while healthy bonus and damage reduction. The Fortify is already solved for, so you can ignore that part. Absolutely lovely. There's but one thing left now, my friends, and that is to get hecking good, and you know it, baby. Okay, so when speedrunning pits or doing the purple hell tides, this is what I do. You press your blood wave, 2 blood lances, and repeat. That is all you need to do. The rest of your skills are basically there for decoration, unless you're doing bosses, as you should already be one-shotting everything. In that case, you should make sure to throw out a Blight for the damage bonus and Corpse Explosions for the 40% damage from your Perragons. When it comes to pit pushing, things are a bit more interesting. I typically ditch Blood Lance, as I know I'll be standing on top of my enemies getting pounded and may as well collect the blood orbs myself. The rotation is then as follows. You start by throwing out a blood wave on top of your enemies. This will in turn spawn a buttload of corpses due to hewed flesh in the skill tree and the high lucky hit chance of blood wave. You can then use those corpses to drop down a corpse tendril and pull the enemies in. Once you've done that, drop a Blight and start spamming out blood waves and corpse explosions. Then you just keep repeating this until they're dead, pull in enemies via corpse tendrils, drop down a Blight, and spam your corpse explosions and blood waves. And just to hammer that shit in, here are a TLDR of the rotation in both the setups. Other than that, there's not much to say. Don't waste your Rathma's Vigor bonus on your Blood Mist or Blood Lances, as you'll then do 0 damage. Whenever you're not overpowering, you're doing something wrong. Before I leave you, here's also a fun tech that you can use if you're on a PC. And if you're on a console, then you're too shit to do this tech anyways, and may as well buzz off. In any way, the blood waves spawn in a 90-degree angle from where your cursor is. So whenever you're in tight corridors or want to pull enemies in a certain direction, you just place the cursor 90 degrees from where you want your enemies to pull towards, and you can do some lovely plays. It's fun as hell, and I recommend. Another thing I recommend is dropping a goddamn sub. Do that, and I'll see you in the next one, friends.
Subscribe to Perragaming right fucking now and watch this fucking video to the right or left as well, or I will shove an assortment of rusty hydraulic torque wrenches up your ass.